Welcome to another installment of Unscripted.net Conversation. This is the On.net Live show, here to brighten your Monday, hopefully. I'm perhaps not the Scott you're looking for, but I am one of your hosts, Scott Addy, with esteemed co-hosts Luis Quintanilla and David Pine. We're super excited to welcome today's guest, one of our very own cloud advocates, Brandon Minnick. Brandon, could you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah. Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me on the show this morning. My name's Brandon Minnick. I work at Microsoft along with these fine people as a developer advocate. And lately, my biggest focus has been working on the .NET MAUI community toolkits, which we're going to dive into today. But long story short, they're open source libraries made for the community, built by the community that help make your life as a .NET MAUI developer easier, and we'll find out more soon.
You had me at open source. With that, why don't we roll into the Related Bits segment and see what David has for us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. So the link that you're seeing scrolling across the bottom here is a link to the MAUI community toolkit that Brandon was introducing. It's going to be the entire focus of this conversation, I believe. So it's an open source repository. It's built by the community for the community. And so follow this link, check it out. We've got a green build, which is awesome. Part of the .NET Foundation. There's a release candidate for NuGet, but one thing I found really interesting about this when I just started looking at it, this is actually the first time I looked at this one specifically. I'm somewhat familiar with the Xamarin Community Toolkit. So this is, I'm assuming, inspired by that same premise. So some of the driving factors that are really cool about this is whenever there's common elements that you're replicating across your projects, like if you're a mobile developer and you kind of copy and paste code from one project to the next, some of those common elements, this is a home for those sorts of things, things that may have not matured enough to make it into the official product, but this is where the community is sharing ideas and innovations and things that are commonplace. So I encourage you to check it out. The README is filled with how you get started, where you could, specify that you're going to use the community toolkit, how to use it within XAML, referencing there. And since it's open source, you can submit new features and things of that. So I encourage you to check it out. And we'll leave this related bits kind of short and sweet and to the point, because again, the entire talk here is going to be about the toolkit itself, and Brandon can speak to that a lot better than I can. So let's jump into the hallway track.
Awesome. All right, here we are, the virtual hallway track. So why don't we, David had alluded to some .NET MAUI content. It sounds like we may have someone here today that knows a thing or two about .NET MAUI. Maybe that's where we start the conversation. Brandon, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, it sounds good. I tell you, if you want to bring up my screen, we can dive right into it, because I do have a little introduction to .NET MAUI that we can do before diving deep into the toolkits. But yeah, I did put together some slides for us today, and I also put together a website that you can see the URLs here at the bottom of the screen. So codetraveler.io/community-toolkit or community-toolkit. That's a webpage where you can find all the materials that we'll cover today. So things from links to the toolkit, like David was showing just a minute ago. There's actually 2 more toolkits I want to talk about today. There's links to open source samples. There's links to the docs. So if you're interested in doing more .NET MAUI, learning more about the toolkits, using the toolkits, you can find all of that information there. And then on the bottom left here, that's my Twitter handle, the Code Traveler. This is where you can reach out to me if you have any questions. If there's stuff we didn't get around to chatting about today, feel free to shoot me a message. My direct messages are always open. Always happy to chat about .NET MAUI stuff. So, right, what is .NET MAUI? It is essentially the evolution of Xamarin Forms. If you know what Xamarin Forms is, great. You already know what .NET MAUI is. It's essentially Xamarin Forms re-architected under the hood, but all those XAML bits, the MVVM stuff, all the things we know and love with data bindings, all of that's pretty much the same. We just essentially re-architected it to make it better, faster, easier to work with. But if you don't know what Xamarin Forms is, don't worry about that either, because going forward, it's all .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI is the future. And basically what .NET MAUI is, it's a cross-platform framework that allows you to make iOS, Android, macOS, and Windows apps all natively. The secret sauce is in that new architecture, where when you compile for iOS, the code you wrote in your cross-platform code, the code that you wrote that gets shared across all 4 platforms, well, when you compile for iOS, that actually compiles down to the native iOS views, controls. So when you say, I want to put a button on the center of the screen, you compile that for iOS, it'll compile down to the native UI button API on iOS, or on Android, it'll compile down to the Android widget button. And so the app you get is still totally native, with totally native performance, native look and feel, because it's using the iOS APIs, it's using the Android APIs, the Windows APIs. And
so about Windows, we actually just had a question here. Can this be used for UWP as well?
So MAUI uses WinUI, specifically WinUI 3, to build on Windows. Now, that's a about the extent that I know. I'm a mobile developer. I haven't done too much desktop stuff. So I don't know too much about WinUI and how that works, but does anybody
That's a good question. I don't actually know. I don't know myself. I'd have to look that up. That's a good question, though. Let's we'll shelf that and come back to it and see if we can find an answer in the meantime.
Yeah, because Xamarin Forms did support making Windows desktop apps using UWP. But yeah, all I know about this is we're using WinUI to generate these. I think WinUI is part of Project Reunion, so it's essentially unifying APIs across UWP, WinForms, or Win32. But that's, like I said, we're basically right at the wall of what I know about Windows desktop development. But the good news is, if you do all your stuff in MAUI, you don't really have to worry about that, because you're writing cross-platform code that just runs on the platform of your choice, whether it's iOS, Android, macOS, or Windows. And so this is how I like to think about .NET MAUI. This is not actually, you won't find this in the Microsoft docs, or at least not yet, unless they adopt my vision of it. But this is really why we did .NET MAUI at Microsoft. Instead of pushing out Xamarin Forms version 6.0, we kind of hit a point where the only way we could get better performance out of the Xamarin Forms technology is essentially to completely re-architect it. And that re-architecture comes right here in the middle. This .NET MAUI interface layer is the big new deal, the new hotness that comes with .NET MAUI. And essentially, if you were to dive into the .NET MAUI source code, it is all open source. It's in the .NET GitHub organization. And you'll see that everything has an interface. So when I mentioned putting a button on the screen earlier, you would write code that says, put a button in the center. That gets compiled down to the native UI button or Android button or whichever platform you're compiling for. But really, if you look under the hood, that button exists up here in our .NET MAUI XAML UI framework. And it just has an inheritance from an interface called iButton. And that's in this interface layer here for .NET MAUI. So down below, you have all these platforms we support. So I have iOS, Android, Windows, macOS. I have Linux web here, because these are things we're talking about looking into for the future. They don't exist today. Don't hold me to that. Don't go out there and say, Brandon said there was Linux support. This is just to kind of show the modularity and kind of plug and play-ness of .NET MAUI, because if all these platforms have to know about is how to convert an iButton interface into, say, a UI button or an Android widget button, then they don't really care how we wrote our code. And so that is the big cool thing with .NET MAUI. So while it might look pretty similar to Xamarin Forms on the surface, this interface layer allows us to create totally different UI frameworks or app models. So things like there's .NET MAUI Blazor. So you can have a Blazor web view or the Blazor app model, where you have your app.razor file, this basically the same way you would make your Blazor websites. That can also run on .NET MAUI, and that'll compile down to iOS, Android, Windows, and macOS. So if you're a Blazor developer out there, you can leverage .NET MAUI today to start making mobile apps, but using the same models framework that you're familiar with Blazor and the Razor syntax and all that good stuff. There's also we have an experimental framework out there called Comet. Comet's one that I'm really excited about. It's also runs on .NET MAUI on the interface layer, and Comet uses Model View Update framework. So MVU is another new hotness that's circulating around the developer community. A lot of technologies nowadays like Flutter, React, they all use MVU. I'm actually a big fan of it myself, but we won't dive too deep into that today, but that's another option we have. So there's all these different ways you can now create UI frameworks and app models that run on MAUI that will just convert your code from, say, that interface button, that I button, to the native platform button. And you don't have to know about that anymore. With Xamarin Forms, it was all tightly coupled. It was kind of a mess, and that also led to some perf performance problems, but
So you're telling me I get to write C# code and it compiles down to run on all these different platforms, except for the ones with question marks. But like that's
right.
that's the best part. We do have a question here from Samir. He's asking, do you have to use Xcode for compiling your .NET MAUI apps to iOS?
Ooh, great question. So yes and no. You'll have to have Xcode installed on your machine. And the long story short is Apple's rules and regulations. They make every iOS developer, if you're going to put an app in the App Store, that app has to be built with Xcode. That's just in their rules. We have to abide by those. So what we do, we just ensure that you have Xcode installed on your Mac. And then when you build for iOS, we take care of the rest. We still shuttle those bits through Xcode. So we're still following all the rules, but you don't have to open up Xcode unless you really want to. You can, but yeah, things like publishing to the App Store, signing your certificates, all that is done in Visual Studio.
I had no idea. So I just learned that. Like, so that's baffling to me. So like, imagine a world where Microsoft said every .NET app has to be built using Visual Studio. Right?
Right.
Like,
yeah, it's a little wild because then it gets into crazy things like, okay, well, now you have to have a Mac. Well, what if we want to do CI? Well, then you have to find a Mac in the cloud somewhere that can run. And it adds a lot of layers, but, Apple wants you to use their stuff.
I was just trying to like, have some sort of like analogy, right? Like just when you think of it that way, like, I mean, this has been how it has been for Apple for a long time, right? Like, and well, I don't anticipate that changing, but it's one way to think of it. They require Xcode, whatever, even though it compiles down the same binaries. You can't even tell like once the binaries are, compiled, right? I just think it's baffling when you flip it and just say, well, what if Microsoft was all Visual Studio Code and that was it? You can't use Visual Studio Code. You can't use like command line or your favorite IDE or JetBrains or whatever else, right? It has to be, right? That would just be nuts. But okay, I digress.
But yeah, that's part of the .NET MAUI magic is we take care of that for you. And so you'll still be a law-abiding iOS developer. Heck, I have apps in the App Store that I've built purely in Visual Studio, never opening Xcode. So
Brandon,
it's there, but you don't have to worry about it.
If you don't mind, I'm going to kind of lob you a softball here. For folks who want to, kind of embed the name MAUI in their heads and what that really means. It's my understanding that MAUI is actually an acronym. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It's multi-platform application user interface.
Wow. Yeah. See, I thought it was a place you flew to for vacation.
Yeah, also that. I think it's what's it called? A backronym, one where you figure out an acronym from the word, but I don't know if that's true or not. But I mean, it's the acronym's a mouthful. Like multi-platform is what M stands for. And
we have another really good question here in the chat. Someone's saying, is the idea of MAUI similar to Flutter? And like, how would you compare the two?
I mean, similar in the sense that they're both cross-platform frameworks. The big difference with Flutter is Flutter does not use the native APIs. So when we say in Flutter, put a button on the screen, what Flutter actually does, it just draws everything on a blank canvas itself. So it actually uses Skia technology under the hood, if anybody's familiar with Skia, and for us, Skia Sharp in the C# world. So if you picture almost just like a blank canvas that Flutter paints on, that's the big difference with Flutter. And there can be some performance bumps you get there because you don't have to go a layer deeper into the platform-specific code. But at the same time, you also essentially have to recreate all those platform elements. So what Flutter does, they have essentially UI packs. So here's a UI pack that you can use to make your button look like an iOS button. Essentially, they've almost recreated, I don't want to say recreated the wheel, but redrawn the wheel, at least, to mimic what a button looks like on iOS or what a button looks like on Android. But it is all drawn on. So sometimes that's what folks are looking for. Sometimes it's not. But in the higher sense where we are writing code once and running it on multiple platforms, yes. .NET MAUI does that for you via C#. Flutter does that for you via their programming language called Dart. And React Native does it for you in JavaScript. So similar, but there are some nuances under the hood.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've got a ton of questions that keep flowing in, so I'm just going to keep asking them here. So then the next one is, can we use Azure B2C for .NET MAUI?
Oh, yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah, anything .NET related totally works in .NET MAUI. .NET MAUI runs on .NET 6. So whatever library we're using, we'll just have to make sure it targets at least .NET 6 or .NET Standard, something like that, where we can use it in our .NET MAUI project. But yeah, if it runs on .NET 6, we can do it in .NET MAUI.
Awesome.
And for folks who might be wondering what's Azure B2C, I believe we're talking about Azure Active Directory B2C here.
Right. Yeah, the business to consumer, like the authentication, identity. Okay. Another question, are there any updates on when Visual Studio 2022 for Mac will be out of preview? And I don't know if there's any updates on that.
I mean, so we'll say unofficially, the team's targeting to release it at build. Anything can change, and I'm not on that team, so I can kind of say that without being held to it. But yeah, is for .NET MAUI support, that's actually coming in the next version of Visual Studio for Mac. So there's a Visual Studio for Mac preview that's available today that you can use, and I've been using it for months to make my .NET MAUI apps, but it's not perfect. Like sometimes I'll have to build my .NET MAUI apps in the command line on Mac, and then I can use the debugger in Visual Studio for Mac. So there's some weird things right now, but the next version 17.1 of Visual Studio for Mac will have the .NET MAUI support. So what we should see in a couple weeks, if everything goes to plan, is the current preview of Visual Studio for Mac will be promoted to stable, and then we'll introduce a new preview of Visual Studio for Mac, which will bring in the .NET MAUI support officially, even though it basically works nowadays, but you'll run into some of those little pain points where sometimes the build won't build. So I build it in the command line, and then I come back and I run it, and everything's fine. So little things like that, just because it's not officially supporting MAUI yet, but the next preview will.
Awesome. Yeah, there's just, oh my God, there's so many questions. I feel like it's like an endless stream. I'm trying to like cherry pick which ones. So someone's asking if we have like sample demo apps on hand, like To-Do, basic chat app, anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. If you follow that link, the codetraveler.io/community-toolkit, I've got links to a bunch of samples. So we haven't even started talking about the toolkits yet, but the toolkits have sample apps included in them. And also the samples I've linked are some external ones that I've made or the community has made that you can find out as well. So yeah, you can check out all of those. We've got a bunch of samples and more keep popping up from the community as well.
Messages continue to flow. I'm trying to figure out. Okay, here's another one. Is WPF still an active dev platform? That's a good one too, because I mean, UWP came out a while ago now, and that was kind of more or less, still XAML based, Windows target specific. So I mean, I don't really know how to answer that one. Do you have any insights, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally still active, totally still valid. There's a lot of like with WinUI and Project Reunion bringing together a bunch of the desktop APIs. The goal was essentially to make things easier for WPF developers. So I'm not one, so we'll say hopefully it did. I can't say from experience that my life got better, but yeah, absolutely. That was kind of the point, was to show that we're not abandoning WPF, because UWP came out after WPF, but if I'm being honest, UWP just never really gained the foothold, the traction that WPF had and did.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, well, we have this new great technology in UWP, but nobody's really using it. And that's kind of where Project Reunion came in to say, okay, well, let's bring all this stuff together and
Right.
hopefully makes it better for WPF developers.
And this was kind of like an opinion-based question, but so Timebender 360 is saying, is it easier to build your view in code in Maui rather than using XAML compared to Xamarin Forms?
I wonder if Timebender knows me. If you do know me, you know that I never use XAML. I do all my everything in C#, and that includes the UI. And
Really? Interesting.
That's one of the toolkits we'll be talking about today.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because, I mean, spoiler alert, your XAML just eventually gets converted into C#.
Right.
And so, yeah, I always thought it was silly that we have these tools. We're like, yeah, these are made for C# developers. And then you get into it and it's like, okay, now write your first page in XAML. And I'm like, XAML? What? Like, I'm a C# developer.
What's this stuff? Right.
What was this bait and switch?
Another markup language? Come on. So cool. Okay, well let's continue with the presentation. As questions come in, we'll make sure we interject. And but this is great. Keep the questions coming. We love it.
Yeah, we'll keep jamming. I think this is my last Maui specific slide, but long story short, Forms gave us iOS and Android. .NET MAUI will also give us macOS and Windows. We talked about Maui runs on .NET 6 and up. There's a lot of reasons, but mostly why not? Because it's the latest hotness, and there's tons of performance benefits from starting at .NET 6 instead of including backwards compatibility all the way to say .NET Standard like Xamarin Forms did. The re-architecture, we used to have these things called renderers. They were slow, so we replaced them with handlers, which are a lot faster, a lot more lightweight. If you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. But if you do know what a handler is, or if you know what a renderer is, handlers are amazing. They'll change your life. The installation's a little different. Xamarin Forms is always added as a NuGet package. .NET MAUI is actually included in .NET, so we added as a .NET workload. So kind of more similar to ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core nowadays. And then the solution architecture will have one single project instead of having multiple projects. So if you ever did a Xamarin Forms project, you'll know you have your .NET Standard library, your iOS project, your Android project. Whereas with .NET MAUI, you'll just see one single project where we share code across everything. And that also makes our architectures for our apps a lot easier, because with this multi-project stuff, like, you really had to understand inversion of control and dependency injection and all that crazy stuff. With single projects, we can get around that. We can use partial classes, we can use if-defs, so it makes our lives easier and hopefully makes the essentially getting started .NET MAUI a little easier too.
I really love partial classes. I've been using them more and more in other projects, and I just it's one of those features I haven't really used a lot of in my decade plus of writing C#, but now I'm just using them like all the time.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. But let's jump into the toolkits. So, essentially we have, there's lots of toolkits out there. We have a GitHub org called Community Toolkit, and that's where you can find all of these. But there's three that I recommend for every .NET MAUI developer out there. There's communitytoolkit.maui. There's communitytoolkit.mvvm, communitytoolkit.maui.markup. Now, we'll show off we'll show off all of these, but communitytoolkit.maui is kind of like what David was alluding to at the top, where if you think about any app that you've made, there's probably code that you're copy pasting from app to app. I mean, I know I'm guilty of this. So especially with things like an MVVM, right? Like, I have my base view model class that I've probably copy pasted from every single app that I've written over the last 5 years. There's probably some code around bindings or converters or all
We've probably all done that before, right?
Yeah. So it's not a bad thing, but if we didn't have to copy paste it, that would make our lives easier. So the Maui Community Toolkit contains a lot of those cool things. so we don't have to do that anymore. The MVVM toolkit, very similar idea. Let's make the MVVM experience a lot more streamlined, and essentially let's get rid of a lot of the boilerplate code that we have to add because we're doing MVVM. And then the MAUI markup NuGet package is one we also hinted at earlier. This is one for crazy people like me that like to make their UIs in C# instead of XAML. Essentially, MAUI markup adds a bunch of C# extension methods that make it really easy and beautiful to write UI code in C#. So the goal is to help you write less code. And what we want is your contributions to these toolkits. So if there's anything you're doing that you copy paste from app to app, and other folks are copy pasting this from app to app, come join us. Open up a discussion. Let's chat about how we can bring your feature in, because these are all community led, community maintained. I'm one of the core maintainers, and yes, I work at Microsoft, but none of us get paid to do this. This is all stuff that we do in our spare time on nights and weekends. And so we can absolutely use your help if you want to help contribute. So do jump in, offer up your ideas. But let's get into it. Let's show off some of the things you'll find in the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit. The first one being, just the different categories. So we have things from alerts to behaviors, converters, extensions, layouts, views. So if we show these off a little bit, if you've done any mobile app development, specifically on Android, you've probably heard of Snackbar and Toast. They're essentially little alert pop-ups that appear. You've probably seen them in apps when you're just using your phone, where maybe you press the submit button to upload some data. Maybe you're posting a picture, and then you get this little pop-up on the bottom that just says picture posted. Or I think the Twitter app does something similar, or it's like, click here to view your tweet. Tweet's been posted.
Right. Okay, so I guess this is a good question I have, kind of selfishly. So what would MAUI offer out of the box without the community toolkit? So does it have like everything I need to build like a basic app, but I need, like, if there's something like alerts or other behaviors and common converters, that's when I would opt into the toolkit?
Yeah, for sure. So Snackbar and Toast are a little unique because these are very Android specific. iOS doesn't actually have the concept of a snackbar or a toast, so we made one. What the community toolkit does, it allows you to, in your cross-platform code, just say snackbar.show, and it'll display this snack bar on the screen. And on Android, we're using the Android API. So the platform-specific Android snack bar and Toast, those little pop-ups, that's what's going to appear. iOS just doesn't have that API, so we made our own kind of copy of it, something that mimics snack bar and Toast. But .NET MAUI has everything you need. You could actually create these on your own if you wanted to do that in your .NET MAUI app. We just thought these were cool to share with you, so you didn't have to make them. And so while we're chatting, I'll spin up our Community Toolkit sample app, the sample app that lives in our Community Toolkit project. And it's loading right now. Whoop. But once that's loaded, I can show off exactly what that means. And we can circle back to Snackbar and Toast once this simulator.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll wait for that. There is another question here. So someone's asking, does the C# code get compiled down to Java bytecode? And then someone said, no, it's not Java bytecode. And then someone else is saying, is it Microsoft IL or similar? And like, what? It's just bytecode, right? Like, it's not.
Yep.
There's no. Right. Okay.
I mean, there's definitely layers to that. So on Android, Android's got a lot of rules. So things like, let's see. So a lot of things on Android are just-in-time compiled, and they have this whole registry with, if you've ever done Android stuff, like multi-decks, like weird things like that'll real ring a bell. But yeah, essentially our .NET code gets compiled down into DLLs, and yeah, all the way down to using bytecode. But really what we're looking at is all that just gets bundled in with whatever the native app is. So on iOS, it would be an IPA file that we upload to the App Store. On Android, it'd be an Android app bundle that we upload to the App Store. And yeah, essentially if we look under the hood of the .NET iOS, .NET Android technologies, they're essentially just C# wrappers. So we just take every iOS API, all 100,000 plus of them, and every Android API, and we just wrap those into C#. So you can write you never have to write any Objective-C code, you never have to write any Java code, because we've wrapped those APIs. And so it's almost like, it's using p-invoking, if anybody's familiar with that. But that's way under the hood, unless you're going to contribute to the .NET iOS SDK or the .NET Android SDK. You probably don't need to worry about that. But yeah, if you dig deep enough, you'll find some Java stuff in there, some Objective-C stuff in there, but nothing we have to worry about as, say, cross-platform mobile app developers.
Awesome.
And we can show off some toasts. Boop.
Is there a way to zoom in on that a little bit?
On the simulator here?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, better.
No, I mean, it's just a simulator, but I guess I probably should have launched the phone instead of the tablet. but this is what a toast looks like. So if you ever seen like a pop-up like this just appear and then it automatically dismisses itself, that's what we're talking about here. And like I mentioned on Android actually implements these on their operating system on the Android platform, whereas on iOS we essentially recreated that, so it looks just like it, but iOS doesn't actually have a snack bar API, and snack bar is essentially the same thing as a toast, but it has a button, so you can click to dismiss it, or like toast, it'll just dismiss on its own. And if you want to, you can do crazy things like you can anchor it to a button, like this one's anchored to this button. You can have the button, when you tap it, actually trigger an action, like it would just change the color. So you can go crazy with snack bars if you want, but the default snack bar, very similar to toast, gives you a little alert at the bottom that the user can dismiss. Very, very high-tech, fancy things.
Awesome. No, we did have a couple other questions that had scrolled by. I'm just revisiting here. One of them is, when do you recommend to use MVU with Comet versus like MVVM with the toolkit and source generators?
Oh, yeah. So Comet's not officially supported yet. So for example, with .NET MAUI, if this is getting into a little legalese, but if you are a Microsoft customer and you find a bug in .NET MAUI, Microsoft, by law, by contract, whatever it is, I'm not a lawyer, we will fix that, help you fix it, whatever whatever it might be, because .NET MAUI has that go live license. Comet, you'll find it's also in the .NET GitHub org, so github.com/.net/Comet. Also open source. It's still considered experimental. So meaning if you publish your app to the App Store with Comet and something, and I hope it doesn't, but something blows up, you can open up an issue on the repo. Hopefully one of the engineers, maybe James Clancy, who has been spearheading the effort, will see it, will fix it, but we don't have a dedicated engineering team devoted to Comet yet. My hope, selfishly, because I think Model View Update is the future architecture that we'll all be using in all of our apps in, say, 10 years, is that Comet will gain the same popularity as Blazor. So Blazor started out this way, where it started out as just a cool idea that Steve Sanderson had. And was like, hey, everybody, check out this cool idea I have called Blazor. And everybody's like, what? This is amazing. I love it. All of a sudden, people started using it. The demand became really high. It became super popular in the community. And essentially Microsoft had no choice but to devote an engineering team to it and devote money and give it the go live license. So that's what I'm hoping happens with Comet. And so if you haven't, check it out, because if we can get more people talking about Comet, then we can probably get it promoted. And that's when I'll personally feel comfortable pushing apps to the App Store built in Comet. But until then, it's more of a toy for me to just play around with, a show off, and kind of introduce the concept of MVU to C# developers. But that's the biggest difference, is just that go live license, which gives the Microsoft support and the legalese, blah, blah, blah behind it. .NET MAUI has that right now. Comet doesn't. But if we keep talking about it,
Comet,
I'm hoping one day it should. Say it 3 times into the mirror.
Awesome. And we got one more question here real quick. So they're asking, do we have advanced features like background threads or workers with MAUI on Android or anything equivalent on iOS? And I'm not sure if that's alluding to like some of the C# features maybe, or...
Yeah, there's definitely a couple layers to that question. It's a great question. So we'll say short answer, yes. So C#, async await, all that stuff totally just works because we're using .NET. So we get all the benefits of .NET, and that comes with async await and tasks and threading. If you're specifically talking about it, like maybe you're an Android developer and you're familiar with the Android services, or maybe you're an iOS developer and you're familiar with queuing stuff up on the background tasks via their operating systems, yes, you can also do that. So because .NET MAUI, the SDKs under the hood are just the iOS SDK. We just, for example, what is it? iOS 15.4.1, I think is the latest SDK from iOS. When Apple releases those, we just wrap them up in C# and ship them to us, the developers. So all those APIs are there. You can do anything on .NET that you can do, say, in Xcode with Objective-C, because it's the exact same APIs. We're just essentially that translation layer between C# and iOS. So yeah, actually scheduling background services, like with background task managers and stuff like that in Android, absolutely can do that. When your .NET MAUI apps, there's a library I would recommend called Shiny. So there's shiny.jobs. And what they've done in the Shiny library is they've written a lot of that code for you. So I use it in my apps because Shiny also works with Xamarin Forms. So I have apps in the App Store where, yeah, I want to do something in the background, because when a user closes my app, I want to maybe check something once an hour, or I want to update some data for them so the next time that they open the app, they don't have to look at a loading screen. And I use shiny.jobs is the name of the NuGet package. So shiny.jobs. And it's just a couple lines of code to say something like, do this in the background. and that uses the native iOS and Android schedulers and background task services. But if you're just looking to do some async await stuff in .NET, all that stuff's there. That's super easy. The background jobs are a little bit more difficult because it's specific to iOS and Android, but also totally doable.
So there's another really good question here, and this one's getting to the point about like the extensibility. Someone that's maybe used to Angular and React and like RxJS. So how does that extend into MAUI? And can you use that, like, pipes and operators and subjects and all those things? And that's just basically the observable pattern. And Rx.net, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, is available to use. It's just a .NET package you pull in, and it's just a pattern that you can leverage however you see fit.
Yeah, exactly. I will say I don't do any JavaScript, so I don't know JavaScript, but if we're talking observables, then yeah, the reactive.NET library is perfect for you, and will essentially have the same behavior, but yeah, you're doing everything in C# now instead of JavaScript.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, I've used both RxJS and Rx.NET, and it's they're both language specific implementations of that pattern, so it's very doable. Awesome. Great question. Cool. I think that's it for now. We can keep going. Because we still have slides up. We haven't even shown stuff, and we've got...
I know, we have like 20
so
minutes
much.
left. All right, let's try to jam through. So behaviors are something cool that we can add in .NET MAUI, and they're essentially meant to be so us as the developer, we can essentially extend .NET MAUI to do cool stuff without having to write too much code. But what we've done is we brought in a couple of our favorites. So things like this multi-validation one. This one's really popular, especially when it comes to password validation. So like if I start typing a password, we'll see that it's validating it in real time. But every time I type it or enter a digit or a letter is when the validation happens. So here it says I need to add at least one digit. So if I do that and add the number 1, then that becomes true. And here I need to add in at least one uppercase character. And once I do that, that'll become true. And same with the symbol. And once we hit 8 characters, boom, all these are true. Our password turned green. And normally in .NET MAUI apps, this would take a lot of code. But if you just use our multi-validation behavior via the community toolkit, I think the source code for this is literally 20, maybe 30 lines of code. And it's literally just us defining that we need to specify a digit, we need to specify an uppercase letter, and that's really all you're doing. And then you can choose if you want to do these color things where the password's red versus green to give that visual, but makes it super easy to implement these. And that's kind of the idea with all these things. So we have fun animation behaviors, or if you want to verify that an email address is valid before the user can click submit, all these are baked in. So again, you don't have to do them yourself.
That's awesome. I guess another selfish question that I have is like testing. So like with these behaviors in this library, how easy is it to say, I've got these custom business rules that my employer says we need to have for example, the password entry, and we're going to use this behavior. How could we write like unit tests to say, I want to, how difficult is that?
I mean, totally doable, because again, everything's just C#, and we highly recommend using dependency injection for everything in .NET MAUI. Kind of follows that similar flow if you've ever done like a .NET new like Blazor app, ASP.NET Core app, where we have this the iService provider basically in the template for you. So yeah, not too bad at all. I would essentially make my own class that inherits from this multi-validation behavior that then I could write unit tests around. But yeah, the multi-validation behavior is literally just, it says to you, tell me the rules. Like what rules do you want me to follow? And I'll enforce them. And yeah, because it's just .NET code, you could absolutely run unit tests against it. We have unit tests for everything in the community toolkit as well. So you can even cheat a little bit and look at how we wrote unit tests for multi-validation behavior, and then maybe copy paste a little bit of that and customize them a bit for your use.
No, that's a really good tip, because I actually do that a lot. I borrow how other people are testing certain things, open source, right? Get inspired. So cool.
As it should be. Tons and tons of converters if you ever done these XAML and you've done MVVM along with it, sometimes what's in your view model isn't exactly what you want to display on the screen. So to get around that, you have to create this I-value converter. And usually there's a lot of ceremony just to do something simple like inverting a bool. So if is busy is true in my view model, then button is enabled should be false. So I want to invert that Boolean. And we have all these out of the box, and we have there'll be more coming. So again,
some of those though, I would argue like we should talk with the product team and say like, because I remember this specifically when I was doing a lot of XAML stuff. Like I think it was one of the bool ones that was just so common, and right, it was copied and pasted all the time. And it's like, why is this not in the core product?
I don't disagree, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is the goal of the toolkit, is to promote things into .NET. So our big goal as maintainers is to get the features you add to the toolkit promoted into .NET MAUI. And we've done that with a couple features so far. And we're hoping as more features get added and folks, just like you said, David, in the community that say, this is crazy, why isn't this just in .NET MAUI? And I say, yes, I agree. And we'll promote it into .NET MAUI. So that is the overarching goal of all these toolkits, is essentially to, I don't want to say that they hopefully won't exist one day, but hopefully all the features in them today will be scooped up into the official .NET libraries.
Awesome. So we got converters here. There's extensions, layouts, views, and we're running short on time. We do have another question here real quick. They're asking, are there components in here like data grids and lists, stuff of that nature? Or is that maybe something that's too niche?
So .NET MAUI contains that. So we don't need to have those in the toolkit.
Okay,
but
perfect.
We do have a couple, like this is a custom view with pop-ups. So like if you jump down, so like if you want to have like a little pop-up appear on the screen, you can do that. Maybe you want to add a button to it. So that's what pop-up view is. And we have drawing view where maybe you have like a signature pad where somebody has to sign their name. They can sign it. You can capture that as an image like we're doing right here. So these are little things that you can make on your own, but they're not in, these specific views aren't included in .NET MAUI out of the box. So we're essentially augmenting .NET MAUI via the toolkit. And yeah, hopefully one day we can get drawing view and pop-up view into .NET MAUI. That'd be really cool.
Awesome.
Whew. All right. So community toolkit.mvvm. This one's great because it can be used with anything. This is not specific to .NET MAUI, although I highly recommend it for every .NET MAUI developer. If you're just doing any MVVM, whether it's WPF, WinForms, Xamarin Forms, .NET MAUI, you can use this library, and it's incredible. I truly think this is going to change the way we write MVVM code going forward, because what it's done is given us the ability to use attributes to remove a lot of that ceremony that we have to do in .NET, where, you know, if we're doing MVVM stuff, well, we have to have a property in our view model for everything that we want to bind to in our view. And then for that property, we have to have a backing field. We have to make sure the setter calls iNotify property changed. But check this out. So here, all we have to do with the MVVM toolkit is to have we'll say our backing field. And then if we just add this observable property attribute to it, the MVVM toolkit generates all that code for us. So it's using code generators under the hood to create that property with the first name with a capital F. So like down here, we have a property called full name that points to first name with a capital F and last name with a capital L. But you'll notice we didn't write that code ourselves. We just said first name with a lowercase f and last name with a lowercase l. And by adding the observable property attribute, the code generators created that first name property. So now this property exists, but we didn't have to write it. And we can bind to it. It's going to call iNotify property changed. It's going to handle all that ceremony for us. And all we had to do was create a field called first name and slap an attribute on it.
Brandon, there've been I'm kind of scrolling through the chat here to see what we haven't discussed. There are a couple of things that have been mentioned that I'm curious about myself. What is the support story like for Google's Fuchsia and also for Tizen? Is MAUI usable on either?
I have no idea about Fuchsia. Fuchsia is Google's operating system that they were going to replace. The rumor was, I don't work at Google, so I don't know the inside story, but the rumor was they were going to replace Android with Fuchsia, and then the default programming language for Fuchsia was going to be Dart, and that's kind of where Flutter runs on Dart, and that's where all this kind of stuff came from. But I haven't heard anything about Fuchsia officially replacing Android going forward. Maybe that just became too much work, or, I mean, if I'm being honest, Fuchsia was created when Google was going through all those disputes with Oracle over who owns Java and whether or not Android was truly open source because it uses Java. And now you need, or there was a bunch of legal court cases around it. But so I can't speak to Fuchsia. Let's see, what was the other?
Tizen was the other one.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you wanted to develop for a wearable, like a smartwatch.
Yeah. So Tizen's actually really cool. We at Microsoft don't write any of the Tizen code, but .NET MAUI does run on Tizen because of the awesome engineers on the C#.NET team at Tizen or at Samsung. They open up pull requests and add in all that functionality. So yeah, out of the box, .NET MAUI runs on Tizen. You can use it for, if you're, if you want to put it on your smart fridge or your smartwatch that runs Tizen, you can totally do that. And all of that comes from the amazing team at Samsung. So
That's
shout
awesome.
out to
That's really
shout
cool.
out to Samsung. Yeah, those guys are great.
So I've been seeing a lot of C# code here, and I really like F#. And we have a question here from Fuel. How does MAUI work with F#, or even other languages in the .NET ecosystem?
Yeah, so well, the answer to that is it should work because everything's just .NET. Now, I can't speak to 100% certainty that everything's going to work great because I'm not an F# developer. I haven't played around with it yet, but I will say that's something that we have taken action on for the community toolkit to make sure all of our things work in F#. Because there sometimes can be little things where either the linker will remove things because it doesn't think you need them, even though you do, or we have code generators in the toolkit that are generating C# code. Should we have them generating F# code? But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all .NET. But I do give the caveat just because I've seen other projects say, yeah, it's just .NET, so it'll work in F# just fine. And then F# developers start using it and they're like, wow, wait a minute, hang on. We got to make some tweaks here. So my bet is it's in that stage, but yeah, give it a shot, try it. Let's let the MAUI team know if there are any problems with F#. But at the end of the day, it is all .NET, so it should work.
I was waiting for Luis to say something about F#. So thank you for doing that.
Whew, all right. So we've got 5 minutes left. So to wrap up the MVVM toolkit here, basically you add an attribute onto your field, it turns it into the property for you. So capital F first name now exists, but it's in auto-generated code. That auto-generated code is the one that calls iNotify property change and handles all that for you. And then you can also do things like how full name actually depends on first name and last name. Well, that means anytime first name and last name changes, that we also have to notify that full name's changed. So that's where you also notify change for and say that anytime first name changes, also notify full name. So lots of boilerplate code we can rip out of our apps. I'm going to do this shortly for one of my apps, Get Trends. Is an open source app that I have in the App Store. It was written in Xamarin Forms. I will be porting it to MAUI, but step one, I'm actually going to go through and add in the MVVM toolkit, replace all the boilerplate code that I wrote with things like this I command, right? So I commands really just point, 9 times out of 10 will just point to a method that already exists in your app. So why not just put an attribute on that method that says greet user now has a command associated with it, and that'll generate, we see here in the code on the left, greet user command. So it creates the command, it just appends the word command to the end of the method name. You can pass in properties, you can allow multiple concurrent executions if you want, you can return async task and it'll automatically create an async relay command for you. Really, really powerful stuff. Highly, highly recommend it. But let's also show off the MAUI markup toolkit with just a couple minutes left. This one is if you want to create UIs in using C# instead of XAML, highly recommend it. That's my go-to. It has been even though I used to work at Xamarin, I work closely with the .NET MAUI engineering team nowadays at Microsoft. I never really learned XAML, so I never had that XAML background. And for me, when it was time to learn how to create UIs, I said, okay, great. I'll just keep doing it in C#. So what these fluent extension methods allow us to do is essentially really, really easily say, center that button in the center of the screen. So, or add text to that button, or for our bindings, we can bind anything we want inline. We can even include converters. So if you wanted to convert something, you just pass it in right here as a lambda. You don't have to create an I-value converter or do all that ceremony. So makes it really, really easy to write that code, and actually have an example here where this is just the .NET new. Like if you create a new MAUI project, you get this template that comes with a little click counter. Pretty standard stuff for Hello World apps nowadays. And on the right, this is what the code looks like in XAML. And on the left, this is what it looks like in C# using these fluent extension methods that come in the MAUI markup community toolkit. And you'll see it's pretty identical. Things like we have a vertical stack layout inside of a scroll view, vertical stack layout inside of a scroll view. We have spacing, padding. We add our children in here. So a label with text that says hello world with font of size 32. We center it horizontally. So it makes these C# markup extensions are these fluent extension methods here, like text.label.font.center.bind, that just make it really easy to create your UIs in C#. And the best news is you don't have to choose one or the other. Like if you already have an app made in that uses XAML, you can still create content in C# with these C# markup extension methods. And we're actually doing that in the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit sample app. We have a couple pages that were just easier to write in C#, and a couple pages that we reuse, but maybe they have a different title. So we can more easily inherit code using C# than we can with XAML. So if you ever find yourself writing UI code in C#, add in that community toolkit .maui.markup NuGet package, because it'll make your life so much easier with this nice fluent syntax.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap things up for today's show. Our friend Fuel Snable asked a question. So before you had displayed your editor here, you had a C# name of expression you were using. Let me find the specific question. Question was, what does this actually return? This line of code here.
Yeah, so in this example, we're binding a button to an entry. An entry in .NET MAUI is just a text box. So an entry is where you can enter text. So I named that entry 1 up above. It's not in the screenshot. But so what we're doing is creating a view-to-view binding. And I'm binding my buttons is enabled property, so whether the user can click it or tap it or not, to the length of that entry. So in entry, to answer your question, name of just takes the name of the very last property. So this is name of entry.text.length. This just returns the string length with a capital L.
I think that's where the confusion was, because there was a hierarchy you were traversing here. So it sounds like it will take the name of that last property and return that.
Yep. And so that way, because what we're doing here is, if somebody has to enter their name before you can submit or click submit, we want to make sure that the name box isn't blank. So yeah, if the length is not 0, then we can enable the button for the submit button. But if it is 0, then yeah, we're not going to let you enter in anything. So that's what's going on here. But yeah, no matter how many dot whatever you put inside of a name of, it'll always resolve to the final property name or the final class name, whatever's last.
Great. So why don't we wrap things up for today's show? We're at time. I'd love to take an hour of questions and have Brandon share even more with us, but we're being told the show is coming to an end. We appreciate all of the time that you all have invested with this crew today. Again, this has been the On.NET Live Show. As a reminder, you can check out show recordings, upcoming topics, and more at dot.net/live. If you tune in next week, we'll be joined by guest Aaron Stannard, who will be joining the show to talk about building low latency distributed systems with Akka.net. Thanks again, and we will see everyone same time next week. Thank you.